to the rhythm, catching every beat. Together we embrace the futures at our feet. The futures at our feet.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. It could be morning, afternoon, evening, or whenever during the day. The bit before this made the bloopers, and Ben leaves it in. Thanks, Ben,
definitely.
for that. And everyone
Definitely
now
leaving
sees
it in. Definitely.
But yeah, what a horrific start to the podcast. But we're just going to delve into it. Ben, not interested because you're now leaving this in, what you've got to say and how you are. I'm going straight to the guest. And we have Rita Bateson. Rita, do you want to introduce yourself? To a bit of context on it. Why were you here? Where have you come from? And for those people that might not have met you or read about you, what's your journey and what is your organisation? Because we can see it on the screen a little bit.
Sure. Well, evening to us all. My name is Rita Bateson and I am delighted to join you guys. I'm a big fan of the podcast and have been listening for years. So I'm excited because I've spent the last kind of 3 years, as we all have, grappling with AI. And in the last year, we've established an AI support mechanism and business for schools. And it's been really, really interesting. So I've spent a very, very long time researching, writing a book, engaging with all the positive and negatives, which we'll talk about. And I'm also joining you from Dublin, which is living and kind of the cost of AI. So we're going to talk about ethical and sustainable AI, hopefully, what that means for school leaders, what it means for students, where it manifests in the curriculum, everything that you guys talk about, on the regular. Just hopefully I can add a new perspective or add a new insight, and also what's coming over the hill. What are we thinking about for development? Where are we investing our energies and time, and where is an absolute waste?
Well, it sounds exciting, and it sounds like you are right at the cutting edge of this, and so it's great to be able to talk to people that are building this, doing this, and not just talking about building and doing this, which is there's a whole host of those people that are making their money out of education, right? So But I suppose before we dive into the business, the book, the bits that you've mentioned there, we always think it's interesting to hear a little bit about why people do what they do. So whether their experience of education has been something the way it has, or what they've worked in to get them to the point that they are at now. Before we talk about where you are at now,
Our origin story. Yeah, happy to. It was 2001, and I really desperately wanted to work in international schools. I was a baby teacher, and the international baccalaureate wasn't really big back then. And every school I applied to said, you better have British experience or there's no point in going abroad. So I hopped on a plane to Leeds because I heard there were some Irish footballers there, and hung out with them for a bit and got a job in a very tough school, which actually was the making of me. And I stayed in Leeds for about 8 years, met a man, dragged him along, and we went to Switzerland, Bermuda, Germany. I always miss somewhere. America. Worked at the IB for a while as a curriculum advisor and writer. So that's where my heart kind of lies in the international system. But I think if you've grown up in the British system and you understand really how it works and how data is impacting everything, and how these political cycles of change really affect the British system, then it puts you in an amazing place to understand what change looks like in every other context. So when I went to the IB, it was really interesting to see how every country does it slightly differently, but everybody looks at everybody else and is watching constantly what's happening. And also it toughens you up. Like, it really does make you a very, very strong and very, very good teacher if you can communicate and connect with kids who really don't have all the access to everything. So when I teach in incredibly private and privileged international schools, and when I taught in very underprivileged and underserved communities, I was still the same teacher. And I think that's really interesting, is that we don't talk about it enough, that people still give their all to every single situation. So I think then I wrote some textbooks. Let me think what else I missed. I opened an international school here in Dublin, a continuum school from 3 to 18, just in time for COVID. That was exciting. And then about 2 years ago, I had to take some carers leave, because when you're in the sandwich generation, you have to do that, right? And in that time, ChatGPT was just blowing up in education. And I was initially very, very skeptical, very worried about what it meant for pedagogy, what it meant for epistemology, what it meant for knowing and knowledge. And over the last 2 years, I've started to see some really positive use cases. So I've tried to stay as open-minded as possible, but I've also seen so much churn and so much noise and so much panic in schools. And it's not fair to do that to schools. We've just survived a pandemic. We've just weathered EdTech. And I think now is an interesting time for us to visit some of those lessons from the past. So that's what's brought me to now. I think it puts me in an unusual place. You mentioned earlier on like consultants and businesses that just point at the obvious and don't have any solutions. I think that's a real bugbear. As somebody who used to be a budget holder, as somebody who's had too many of those PD sessions, I really wanted to make sure that any advice schools are getting is valid, is thoughtful, is considered, and is well researched. So I think that's something that was definitely missing in the conversation for that first year, maybe year and a half of AI development.
I think it's really interesting. It triggered me. You said the word weathered EdTech. It triggered me in
Did
terms
it?
of, I was like, yeah, I don't know why. It just made me think as if like it's a storm that will pass.
No, I
I
meant
don't-
in the scientific way.
Yeah, which is yeah. I don't know why that triggered me. I don't know why
good
it
though,
did,
because
but
I think-
it's absolutely.
Well, weathering is a good thing, right? In terms of when you think about geology, when you think of those things, it just has negative connotations. And I think that's the thing, is that there were so many things that came in to classrooms. As somebody who taught before we had emails and before we had platforms and notifications, and we used to have this thing called gained time. I don't know if you remember it. That you had time to develop yourself as a person, as a teacher. You had pockets of time within the school day because you weren't pinging all the time. And I think if AI could get us back to that, because I really do, I have an issue with companies and technologies that say we can take away lesson planning, we can take away resource making. Like those are the bits that make me a really good teacher. Those are the bits where I wanted to spend my time in the classroom with kids. And now there was one day when I walked down the corridor of my school and 80% of my teachers were stuck behind their laptop. And I knew they weren't DOSing, like I knew they were messing. They were doing all of the things that the system required them to do. So it's made them change to a laptop in certain circumstances. So if AI could take that away, I'd be delighted, and get back to the craft teaching and the time with kids and the interfacing. That would be amazing. And that's what the weathering has given me, that insight as to like, okay, some of these things were incredible. They're reducing the barrier to access for things, personalizing learning, genuinely personalizing learning for kids instead of just talking about it. Those are amazing. But we also have lessons of things really badly done, money wasted, time wasted, implementation churn, churn, all of that has been really intense for schools. And I think now would be a great time to take a breath and say, okay, these are the fabulous things that we know, and these are the things that are a waste of time.
And I'm intrigued by that then. Okay, based on these are the things that we've tried that we should throw away, and these are the things that we might do. What? And I know you might not be able to say exactly what you're thinking, but what, I'm not necessarily saying tools or products or anything like that. But what things do you think we've wasted time and effort and resource on?
That depends on the country and the context, right? Because if we talk about the UK, certainly in my time now when I grew up as a teacher, there was such an emphasis on data. And there were days when I was really sad. A kid could tell me where they were in the order of 200 kids. They said, I'm number 124, so I can't join the booster class because I'm not on the BC borderline, so I don't deserve extra help. And I think things like that stuck with me. The times when we've had a slavish addiction to data, and I'm a math teacher, right? So I really do appreciate data and everything that it can give us. But this cycle of, coming back, inquiry-based learning, concept-based learning, oh no, we're back to retrieval, we're back to information dissemination. So there's phases and fads that I think that we can learn from. Those have been swaying with the wind. And it would be nice to maybe chart a more moderate course through those things. I think that there's also been real factions with that as well, associated with all of those kind of pedagogy shifts. And that's been a real shame to see that, because there's no there's no right or wrong way for teaching, right? But there are extremes of philosophy and extremes of approach. And I think if we could take from those things, I think there's also been this ever-growing tech stack. So if you have 15 or 17 or 20 platforms, some of which are obsolete, maybe Agentic AI is going to take all that away. Maybe we'll be able to have schools that can own their own platforms and have disposable software and escape like of education. That's something that really worries me, is that we've really embedded so many subscriptions, so many AI wrappers now into school lives, that maybe that's where something that we can take from that. I think that's what I'm worried about a little bit.
What was interesting then, you said something about, so you mentioned about teaching.
Yeah.
And you mentioned about that there is polarization of approaches, and not necessarily from a teacher's. Some teachers did get embroiled in, we belong to this group and you belong to this group. But actually, generally, it's a narrative given by a government or a cluster of people or a connected or a community. You're futurist, I'm traditionalist, all of those kind of things. But I'm starting to believe it in terms of whole approaches as an organization and teaching and learning as learning styles doesn't exist. Teaching styles, potentially, do they exist? Or actually, is it interchangeable based on the weather, the day, the subject, the tool, the learners that you have? These different schools to colleges, because ultimately in colleges, primary, to secondary, and then secondary to FE, when you go through those bits, you might be seeing a very different collective group of learners throughout your day, where primary, they tend to stay with you. So that's different. And you will vary your approaches based on subjects and everything else. This whole thing of I am traditionalist and I am future. Well, actually, sometimes you might just want to get them sitting down and reading. Does that make me a traditionalist? And I've moved away from my beliefs as a futurist? No, it doesn't. It's just, I think it's that dynamic of, do we need to poo-poo the myth of futurist versus traditionalist?
I think so. And I think also that's not a bad thing, right? This whole idea of centrist dad approach, like there's a real body of people in the international school system who think everything has to be inquiry or inquiry. And then you can end up in a real fuzzy mess, can't you? Like where the kids are allegedly controlling their own learning or directing their own learning, but often the kids don't know which way to go. And then you have this traditional, maybe content heavy approach where the students know a vast amount, but they can't think for themselves. And I think the sweet spot between both of those is really powerful. If kids can critically evaluate, if they can discern, if they can also retrieve and recall a huge amount of information, that's the best of all worlds. And I think I agree with you. I think one of the things is that people seem to gravitate to the extremes. Maybe that's part of, I don't know, radicalization manifesting in education. I don't know, but people do seem to want to have camps in education. But actually, there's so much that you can take from each of those styles. Like you say, I'm going to teach very differently on a Tuesday of a full moon when it's raining outside than I do on, like a Friday afternoon recap lesson where I know that they already have one eye on the door. Like it's a craft for a reason. Like it's not a science. It is definitely an art form, I think. Giving people time to develop their craft means that they can experiment with direct instruction. They can experiment with constructivist approach. But if you're just getting through the day, you can't get to any of that.
Yes, I agree. And I think this idea of being able to reflect and pivot and think about, okay, well, I want to do a bit of this. I want to try a little bit of that. That requires the space. If you've been listening to the podcast, you know that we talk about that we need more space. And if we were to do, I keep thinking about doing this actually. Should we do a shadow curriculum and assessment review and write down this is what we would have put in? The youth shadow panel did that, and we interviewed the guys from the youth shadow panel, and what they said they wanted the new curriculum assessment review to look like in comparison to what came out was very, very interesting. And they came on the podcast, and the actual curriculum assessment review panel didn't come on the podcast. So, but if you were to think about it, most of that is about space, isn't it? It's about the ability to reflect, the ability to think, this is why I'm doing this, not just I'm in this camp because I've always been in this camp. It's the ability to critically assess reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing, rather than just doing it because that person down the road did it or because that's what I've always done.
And I'd be interested, this is why I want to read your book as soon as it's out, because part of the issue is that when I was at the IB, for example, the institutional antibodies are so strong. Like there are so many factors that you have to think about. Oh, will this work in China? Will this work in the US? Will this now work over here? Will universities go for it? There's so many reasons not to do things that I understand why curriculum and assessment gets stuck. And I think the vision that's needed to break through those is often not always possible. I don't want to say lacking, that sounds a bit harsh, but like the fact that there's so much joined up thinking required to make actual change that I've seen now how easy it is not to make real changes, how easy it is to do tiny iterative changes that don't please everyone. Sometimes they don't please anyone. But I think you're right. I think the fact that like every curriculum and assessment review has overlords that need to be pleased, that means that you're never going to get that radical rethinking education that we need to do.
And
Agreed.
Is it that why a review of the Nordics and a collective cluster comes in, where ultimately those are taken cross-decision, cross-party over a 10 or a 20-year approach, and we continue to drive that forward? I think it's Iceland that did that. I think there's many other countries. How do we take ego and opinion out of it by driving that forward, I think?
And also, angst and anxiety about experimenting with education. The fact that like nobody really seems to want to have kids pay the price of our mistakes, and yet that's always the system. That's always the change that's required. I don't know. It's really interesting. I wonder what it would take to move the needle, because we had a pandemic, right? And we had all of the opportunities to go and learn everything from the digital revolution. And Nothing significantly changed, especially like I can speak for Ireland for sure. There was real change coming in the senior cycle reform. And I think the pandemic spooked people. And now AI is spooking them even more. So I worry that it's going to be even more change resistant and even more anxious. So I think there's something to be said for long term. And it's a very British thing as well, because your education system is so linked to the political cycles and so reflective of the politicians that are embedded in there, that I think it makes it twice as hard to change anything in that way.
Yeah,
So
and it's civil service as much as anything else as well, isn't it? So it is cyclical. An election cycle. Mick Waters talks about this on the podcast quite a lot. It's cyclical, and it's tied to, okay, nothing's going to happen. In fact, I actually had a conversation with somebody, and I walked out to say who they were, because no, I can't. I genuinely can't. And he said to me, I'd love to come on a webinar with you. However, we are now in election cycles, so we've got to be careful about what we. And you go in, what? Like, this is where we are. So we're in election cycle. So we're not just talking about the problems, why we can't, what we do. It feels like what you're trying to do is build a solution or help with a solution, not the solution, but a solution to support organisations in that space. So tell us a little bit about Eblana. Have I said that right?
Eblana? You have. Eblana.
I know what it means. Because I did the research. So I know that Eblana is the original name for what people think is Dublin, because it's a settlement in the space that we think is Dublin, but also that obviously Dublin is well known for its creativity, innovation, technology. It's a hub for lots and lots of organisations globally to work from. So I'm guessing that's where it came. Look at Steve.
Before you do, I walked down Eblana Street in Belfast the other week.
That's weird.
As you're telling the reason, I'm going to find it, and everyone goes, no, you're wrong.
It was Whittaker Street. It was like totally.
I'm going to find it. Right, I'm going to find it. It
was like Esterman. It was, well researched. You're the first person who's able to find that much detail. So originally, I suppose we saw ourselves in Ireland as the land of saints and scholars. We would send out these emissaries to establish educational institutions across Europe. And if we put religious issues aside, there was a real commitment to copying the scrolls and the sacred texts, and also innovating, making them beautiful, illustrating, innovating them. And I think as the Middle Ages burned across Europe, they would protect these sacred texts with their lives. And some of the only records we have of ancient Greek and other languages are from that sacrifice and protection. And it felt to me that AI is a little bit like that. Like, it can burn around us, and it can also be the impetus or driver for change. And so how are we going to keep what's really valuable, and how are we going to illustrate, animate, elevate what we already have? And also, my husband wouldn't let me call our first child Eblana, so we're stuck with this here. And also, he calls it a blah blast. That's his favorite thing to mention about the company. But essentially, we feel that there is a commitment required, that the educators' voices have to be much, much stronger in the AI space, because we are the guardians of students' cognition.
The galaxy.
Yeah, exactly.
Guardians of the galaxy.
Yeah. We're superheroes, is what I'm saying. I actually hate that metaphor. Like, I've always said teachers are not superheroes. I hate that. But we are extremely dedicated professionals who really care about our kids' cognition and our creativity. And that's what needs protecting in AI. Nothing else. Like, so long as we are making sure that they are embodied learners, that we have sustainability at their core, that we care about their thinking and their knowing and their voice, then we're doing the absolute best that we can in education, in life, in preparation, all of those things. So to do that, we originally started off consulting with schools, and then we started to bring in some professional development. And of course, once the professional development is in place, schools started asking for curriculum, and now they're asking for assessment. And I already kind of feel like students are over-assessed, but schools really want something to show that kids can engage with AI literacy and AI ethics. And lots of other things. Really, the solution, when you say solutions, it kind of sounds businessy and a little bit like that. But I think it's funny that when you go into a school, and we're working with a lot of schools now, and I thought at first they would want to co-determine and co-create. But schools actually just want the answer. Like, they just want to know that they're doing the right thing by their kids, and that's somebody that they can trust to tell them what to do. And I never expected that. I never expected that so many people just wanted the grown-ups to come into the room and tell us what we're doing. And so I think for those schools, given that they're bombarded with information, and given that I'm researching like 7-8 hours a day, like you guys are too, you're always on, you're constantly productive, you're constantly like generating new ideas. To be able to do that and be in a full-time school role now, that would be impossible. Just absolutely shockingly impossible. So that's where we're happy to do that research, that credit, that verification. bringing credibility to the space for schools.
By the way, there is a Eblana Street in Belfast. So
Is there?
just, yes, and I did walk down it. Ben, can you remember when we went and we stopped in a dubious hotel? It's just behind that.
How dubious was the hotel?
It was dubious in the fact of like I would feel like I need to clarify that, because that suggests that we were staying in a place that we shouldn't have been. We were exactly in the right place, but there were stains on the carpets that I am not entirely sure of what they were.
Somebody used to be on the podcast and was part of the podcast, couldn't make it to the trip and had booked the worst hotel you could ever imagine. It was like, he wouldn't stop in it. I don't know why he booked it for all of us. So yeah, it was a shocker. But anyway, yeah, it does exist. So
I promise you that we have a higher standard of expectations than that, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of when you're co-creating, how difficult is that then to create a personalized experience for every single organization rather than the sheep dip approach? Is that the ambition? Because ultimately, as a business scales as well, I'm going to ask you all of those questions. As a business scales, the human element is the most difficult thing to keep a grasp of. Because as an AI leading organization, one of the things that people will then go is they use AI for everything will get exactly the same. But what you're saying is AI, how to make autonomy and machines work better so humans can be more human. So what does that look like in regards to your work and the individual schools as you scale and you grow?
Well, I think the emphasis has got to be on that balance, right, between AI literacy, which is going to constantly change. Like models will change, prompt engineering becomes context engineering, agentic AI orchestration becomes a skill for a little while and then it's dead. All of those things are going to constantly change. And that's a nightmare for a curriculum, right? That's a nightmare for implementation. The AI ethics, however, are really static. The fact that we value human-centered learning, the fact that we want students to have cognition and creativity and independence and autonomy, like you said, those are static. So that was really interesting for me when I figured out that those two are very different positions, although complementary. And I think the fact that we're bringing ethics into the heart of it and sustainability, we were talking just before we came on about the sustainability challenge that we have here in Dublin, thanks to AI, in that more than 50% of our grid is dedicated at the moment to the data centers and it's growing all the time. So and I'm having struggles getting online and there are days, where we have the occasional power cut. It is definitely a significant challenge. You can't just say that to education. You can't just say, don't use AI because it's bad for the environment. Or you can't say, just use AI for everything because then that'll make you a better teacher with 90% of your time sitting down next to the kids. Neither of those two things are true. So it's important that we think, okay, if we would like to be considerate in our approach, if we want to be moderate AI users, what does that mean for education? Like, what does discernment actually sound like before you've reached for AI and after you've used it when you're evaluating it? Making sure that schools really understand that there's a real values driven approach that you have to do with AI. If you want the best use cases, identify them, go strong for those use cases, and then identify where AI slop is going to take you away from your mission and your vision. Identify where we're memifying education and not gamifying education. Like, that's really important. It sounds a bit snobby, and it is a little bit snobby. Like, we have to have high standards because we teach kids about the bias in AI, we teach kids about the hallucination in AI, and we don't teach enough about the mediocrity of the output. And I think that's probably where it's going to go next in terms of quality.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I agree, most good organisations are talking about AI bias and using it. Some are just putting their heads in the sand and pretending it's not there. And you'll know that working in the international school setting, it's probably better than in most independent and international spaces. They tend to be better, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, I say better, I mean, they are talking about it more readily, not that they're better at it, but so that's a place to start for starters. But I think you're right, talking about the quality of what comes out of it and not just using it for everything when you should use it. So that critical literacy, as much as the AI literacy and the media literacy. How do I know that this is true? How do I use this at the right point rather than just because I can, because it's there. So like my kids, 11 and 15, they've both got ChatGPT on their phones, and their default now is to go there. And I'm like, is that the only time? It's not just about not using it or using it because it's available. It's about when's a good time to use it. When might not you not use it? I feel like that's what I'm doing with a lot of the work that I'm doing at the moment is asking people to ask the question of, if AI wasn't here, or because AI is here, when have you got to make a critical choice about when to use it and how not to use it, and the bits that tie into that. So yeah, I've just gone a little bit of a rant, but I
But I
think
agree
it's
with you.
important that we hear that.
No, but I agree with you. And I think the biggest thing as well is that we can all be minister for pointing at the obvious, right? And saying, ooh, bad thing. If we don't give kids a structure or a framework or something, at least like when Victoria Headland was on your podcast, she was talking about the bias, with like the implicit bias. And she knows so much about the implicit bias that I often, when I share some of her facts with parents, it blows their minds, or with students, it blows their minds for about 10 minutes. And then they default back to their old habits sometimes. I think giving them a constant reflective framework and say, before you reach for AI, because I agree with you, schools are telling me now that their Google Chat groups, their Microsoft Teams chats that were annoying and pinging all the time in lockdown are completely dead now, are completely quiet, because kids don't reach out to each other for questions. They don't reach out to the teacher for questions currently. That's their kind of feeling. But I think if we can say to them, like, here are 10 questions you should ask yourselves to encourage conscious consumption. Like, is it a bypass, or is it a shortcut? Am I going to save some time? And if so, will I protect that time and use it for something valid? Will I still be proud of my work? Is it worth the energy that it's going to require? So all of those questions, we need to have a really clear, accessible way for kids to reach for it. Because we saw during social media, right? Kids can just go fake news, and decide to believe absolutely nothing, or decide to believe absolutely everything. And that's another lesson from the past that we can try and adapt and use now.
It's still what really interests me currently is why. So why are the teams and the quieter? Why are they not reaching out to the humans? Why are they going to ChatGPT over the social element of each other, adults, and everything else? We can look at mechanisms and we can look at the what and the how, but ultimately the why is, do they feel safe by asking the adults these questions? And that's not in a dangerous sense. That's just the fact that there is a reason why they're going here and not to the reasons why we want them to. We have to, it's like when, and I'm not likening children to dogs, but if you want your pet to come back, you make sure that there is a reason why they come back. And it's a positive reinforcement of, you come here and you do it with a kind voice and everything else. Have we got into the habit of barking at our children and expecting them to come back to us?
I think you're right there in terms of judgmental, like always available, always on, never judgmental AI. But there's also this reinforcement, the sycophancy, right? That AI will never really challenge them as a friend, I think. And that's something, sometimes rules don't feel great. Like when I talk to students, they'll say, they'll make fun of the fact that ChatGPT overpraises everything they do. Like, that's a great answer. What an innovative idea. How amazing. They make fun of it. And then I'll say, but do you ignore it? And they're like, no, everybody wants to be told they're amazing. They know it's facile, they know it's futile, but they still appreciate and enjoy it. So I think I agree with you in terms of positive reinforcement. We want them to be able to come to us. However, they will not always. Like, they just want to ask something quickly and not be judged, not be shamed, not even to be seen to be not listening or not paying attention. So I think it's more complex than only positive reinforcement, but I agree that's a big part of it. And it's hard to reflect on that as a teacher. They don't want to trust me because I'm judgmental. Well, sometimes I am judging them. Sometimes I do need them to eat their vitamins and eat their greens and do the things they have to do. And that's horrible. Whereas AI will tell you what you need to hear quickly at a higher level and at a higher speed and a volume than humans can do. So why wouldn't you reach for it? So we have to then, as teachers, as educators, as parents, figure out what values we can give them, what character development, how can we protect them from the desirability of just getting the easiest answer?
And how do we structure those and support those learners to understand that conflict can be a positive reinforcement and a positive learning experience, that ultimately they hear conflict, negative connotations of conflict everywhere, because actually there is a lot of it. And I get that. But as adults, we need to do a better job of explaining that candor, honesty, and conflict and disagreement actually can be positive. It can help them learn and it can help us improve. And you're not always going to agree. And you don't always have to agree, but still be okay in the same space. We just don't do that.
And we do that quite a lot, don't we, Steve? Like, there's sometimes we're learning how to disagree and do conflict well. and especially with an AI machine, because them AI machines are compliant, aren't they? So generally, you say to it, create something, it creates it, and then you go, I actually don't agree with that. I don't think that's right. And they'll go, yes, you're right, actually. It never goes, no, hold on a minute. This is the reason why I've said that. It always comes back to like getting the pleasing of the person in front of, because of the compliance and the nature of how it's being created, to try and predict what you might want in the easiest possible way and the quickest possible way. But yeah, Steve, we were together yesterday, weren't we? And we don't always agree on everything. Like we were looking at something particular which will come out in the next few weeks and months, and we didn't always agree on everything. But how do you develop our understanding as humans? Because as two passionate northern blokes, we both feel strongly about our position. How do you hold that without being disrespectful? How do you hold that without trying to have power over somebody else? Can you hold them in tension? Can both things be right? That's an option, isn't it? When we've got that polarization that can happen, and AI can almost like exacerbate and hyper develop.
But that's one of the most positive use cases, right? If we want kids to understand the difference between debate, dialogue, and discussion, which is what we're really saying, right? We want them to be able to debate things and then resolve them. Conflict resolution, project management, all of these things which are not in our curriculum right now. They're not explicit in our curriculum. They're kind of embedded, but they're not explicit. Handling ambiguity, handling risk and uncertainty. Their whole lives are going to be dealing with these things. And if we think about, okay, well, the internet came for knowledge and AI is coming for skills, what's left for us in education? It will be those things. It will be the fact that we can give them a space in which not to be anxious about absolutely everything. We can focus on their mental well-being. We can focus on their physical embodiment. All of those things are going to be very human-centered. And in an AI future, those are going to be really valuable. The ability to be able to use AI to show you your own blind spots, to help you design universal design for learning, whatever your desirable outcome is that was just outside of your reach before, this is the moment for that. Like, that is an incredible opportunity.
I don't want you to give all of the ideas from the book away, but is this what you're stepping into? Is it a move from the curriculum and the work that you've been doing and thinking, how can I maybe target a different audience, or how can I get this message across? So I suppose, what are the key themes from the book? Is it parents? Is it adults? Is it everybody? Parents are adults generally, but is it teachers? Who is your target audience? And I suppose, what is
I
it?
suppose
What makes it different from other books on AI? Because, like at a conference, if you can read a book in education often, or edtech, that it doesn't contain an AI chapter or isn't around that at the minute, it's a challenge. So maybe walk into that.
I think you've identified a couple of things there. First of all, audience-wise. So as a former school leader, I thought, okay, these are the people who have their fingers on the levers of change at the moment, who are investing in literacy for schools, who are the ones who are taking phone calls from parents who are panicked about, keep that away from my child or get my child ready for the AI future. They're the ones who are probably second to teachers experiencing the most friction around it, expectations and initiatives and all of those things. So I thought I'd speak to my people first of all. And in that book, so I've divided it into all of the lessons around that we've learned from sustainable AI and ethics of AI to governance, what governance looks like, because so often people are just dumped in an AI situation, whether it's safeguarding or ed tech platforms, whatever it might be, and they don't have the knowledge base with which to make the best decisions. And I think it's not very fair to expect teachers or leaders to upskill themselves overnight. And therefore, I think in that space for the time being, were tech companies who were telling schools and education what they needed to do with AI instead of the reverse. And I think the goal of the book was to try and flip that conversation into, we know what's best for students. We know what great pedagogy looks like. Here's what we're going to do to take control of AI to visit that, because the governance has to come top down and the policies really have to come bottom up, and they have to meet in the middle for kind of perfect synergy. So, oh God, that's a real AI word, synergy. I'll be saying leverage next. I think that is the focus of the book, is that what can I share in terms of the research and the practice and the case studies that we've seen, so that we can really focus on positive, beneficial, proven use cases, and how we can ignore the danger of endless meme and video generation, or what world models means for education, or the things that are over the horizon, so we can think about now, but also what does it mean on the day-to-day to handle parent concerns around privacy, voice, authenticity, the future of skills, the future of learning, the future of education and employment. Like these are big questions that people have. And sometimes schools are kind of finding themselves going, so it would be nice to have some answers to pull on and provide for parents, for stakeholders and for the community. It's also an opportunity really just for us to get that message out there in terms of moderate, considered consumption of AI. And that's something that we're really, really passionate about, because that is ultimately where we're going to make the mistakes of plastic again, where we're going to burn these vast amounts of energy, these terabytes of storage and gigawatts of consumption. It's insanely high, the amount of consumption that we're doing at the moment and the price of that experimentation. So if we could have not reckless experimentation, if we could have much more considered experimentation, I think that would be the best for education.
Yeah, everything about the consideration and thinking through, and what we don't want to do, and I don't think you're suggesting this at all, is like go, well, that's an excuse for us not to take any action, because we need to research and we need to consider, but we do need to get a balance between considered and also getting some stuff done. And I think you're saying exactly that, aren't you?
Yeah.
You are building something. We're building a plane as we're flying it. And in fact, what you're doing at Eblana there is trying to help people do, whilst this stuff is actually growing, what can we do in the space? And I think some of that is tied to the ethical conversations and the ethic. And obviously you'll know that I feel like all I ever talk about at the moment is about critical thinking. And you probably feel the same in terms of all I ever seem to talk about is ethical AI and purposeful use of it. And it just feels like it's but we need to keep talking about it, because people are going from, here's X tool that's got the word AI thrown on the end of it, and therefore it means that it's double the price because the energy is this and the processing power is that. We're now getting to a point where we need somebody to help us make a decision. I was on a course with somebody recently, today actually. I was with a group of people who just said, could you just tell me the tools that I should use, because there's too many to choose from? And I'm like, no, I want to help you make the decision so that when you get shown any, you can then go, this is why I'd consider it. This is what I would be looking for. In the same way that in schools, the first question in UK schools now is it GDPR compliant? Now needs to be asking broader questions about ethically, is it right? Is it sustainable conversations? How is this meeting the guidance from the EU AI Act and all the other bits that go with it, the new DFE AI guidance, all the other bits that go with it. So anyway, tell us a little bit about what you're doing with that.
Well, I think that's really important, because one of the 4 questions that I ask all educators to frame their decision-making around, to establish, because people don't know what is a good use case or a bad use case until they've experimented. And I think the 4 questions that I would always ask them to ask themselves are, after they've used it, or before, as the case may be, has it made your classroom environment richer? Like genuinely, has it added a dimension that wasn't there before? Can it serve your students in a way that you didn't before? Because if you talk to students with medically diagnosed needs or specific educational needs, it is an incredible unlock. Like it would be professionally negligent of us not to use it for those kids. Like if it's going to do something for them that I could never do before, like differentiate at a really macro level and at a micro level, then by God, I'm going to use it. So if it can enrich the classroom, if it can serve your students in a new way, and if it genuinely frees up time, like not generates more work, makes you more productive, and therefore burn out faster. We don't want that. But we do want time back for the things that really matter. If you can say yes to any of those questions, then it's a perfectly good and valid use case. Then it's worth experimenting with, pursuing, and eventually churning it and making sure that you're not becoming reliant on it. The other question I always ask them to say, though, is it reducing the productive struggle in kids? Because we want to reduce kids' struggle. We don't want to reduce their productive struggle. And if you say yes to that, then it is not a valid use case. Then get out quick, because that's the important part.
I'm smiling there about productive struggle. We need to get the right struggle, don't we?
We do. And you said critical thinking, and I would agree with you about critical thinking. But I think it's beyond that, because critical thinking was always before verify your sources, triangulate the information. Who can you trust? Who can you not trust? It's beyond that now, because they're in critical discernment. Now it's triangulate your sources, try and find it. It's going to be harder to get back to the root cause of the information, which is, I guess, why Notebook LM is so popular, right? Because it's grounded. And people love the fact that it will say, I don't know, when it doesn't know. You know, that's a really beneficial thing for AI. But I think having kids discern now, beyond of like making a judgment about things and applying their own ethical values and their own educational standards on stuff, teaching them to aim higher, teaching them to not accept a convincing answer that could be correct, but could be really boring. That's what education is going to become.
very boring.
Maybe.
But yeah, I suppose I think, and how do we step into that? I know I'm trying to frame the question to not be like, tell us all the stories and give the practical advice and all those kind of things. But ultimately, like, you will have learned so many lessons from your teaching, with AI or not, the work that you're doing, all of those kind of things.
I'm smiling there, by the way. I yawned really badly and it made everybody else smile. So apologies. If
I didn't
anybody's
see that.
only
I didn't
listening
see
to
that.
that,
I thought, why is everyone laughing? Yeah,
I
Ben,
yawned really
obvious.
loud.
You made me
Was it
yawn. That's
me?
why.
So why I just looked up. I was kind of like that thinking, and I looked up and you were both yawning and laughing. I'm thinking, am I
You made me
boring?
yawn.
But
He made me yawn. He started
I
it.
think it's absolutely thrown me. I
So-
don't even know what I'm talking about anymore.
I know, but
Anything.
let me
But
jump in though.
Step through it. Yeah, go on.
If that's all right, just because I'm going to go back to Ben's analogy, right? Before he started yawning, about landing the plane, about building the plane in midair. Like, we've been doing that for too long. It would be nice to eventually land that plane, and get people off of their destination and get them working and thinking and learning and all of those things. My goal is to take all of these lessons that we've learned, all of this best practice and pockets of excellence that we've seen, connect them, and then not have AI be the main voice in every conversation and not have AI be the main focus of people's concerns or anxieties or optimism, to really recategorize and recalibrate it where it belongs. Because ICT went a very recognized path, right? As a subject, as a tool, as a transformational idea, all of those things. And we have so much to glean from those. I do think there is a future, like maybe 2-3 years ahead of us, where AI isn't the topic of every conference, of every conversation, of every decision made in schools. But I think we're a little while away from that. But I look forward to that day where it isn't about AI. It isn't about the dangers and the optimism that whatever bubble or panic or whatever might come, that schools are still doing what they do really well and just have more tools at their disposal and have more power for their teachers.
We talked about planes. We talked about would it be wonderful if we weren't flying the planes and we were getting to the destination. My concern is, do we need to change the destination? Is some of the challenges with AI, some of the things that we're doing around education technology, around a focus on the destination on the passing of the exam and those things. I think what's really interesting is we are leading, we're going, that doesn't fit. Well, ultimately, it's because the destination where we often go in education, I don't believe is the right one, or shouldn't be the only destination. It's like we're going to an airport and there's only one plane. It's only going to one place. I'm like, it's pointless. Absolutely pointless. And we all seem to be turning up and trying to find exactly the same plane at the same time as well, which is always an interesting one, like the driving test. So I am interested in trying to get us to where we need to be, but I think we really need to go back to the purpose and redefine what the outcome or some of the outcomes and the collective outcome of education is. And it shouldn't be just the passing of a grade. It should be progress, it should be exploration, it should be concepts and passion.
But in my lifetime and my professional career, there's never been a better moment for it than now, because
Absolutely.
all of education has been a pipeline for the knowledge economy, and the knowledge economy is under threat. So this is the perfect moment to be able to say, okay, what else is there? What else can we do? What else can humans occupy their time, their brains, and their hearts with? This is the moment to do it. And the reticence to do that is still very palpable. But like I said, we didn't do it during the pandemic. We didn't do it during the internet revolution. Now is the only time that we have.
Yeah, we haven't got another chance. We haven't got another chance, have we? Because and the fact is that the young people that we're dealing with, they haven't got another chance of going through education either. And the teachers that we're working with don't have another chance to have another go. Like, it's not like it's not like playing an arcade game. This is the game of learning, which is one. Yeah.
But Ben, you've got a 15-year-old, right? The future of work for them, like, I'm lucky, I've got an 11-year-old, so I've got a couple more years for the society and the world and education to figure itself out. What are you advising them? Like, what are you saying to them about, like, it's time to become a plumber?
Well, this is really mad, because I've listened to Elon recently talking about, well, there's no point doing a medical degree, because actually he's obviously selling a product. That was a nice cling. He's obviously selling a product.
We're gone. It's over.
Steve's
Everything's
food
going off.
ready.
I forgot. I keep muting my mic and somebody keeps putting it back on. I think I press it. Ben puts it back off.
I don't put it back on. I didn't put it back on. I didn't touch it. I can't touch it. I can't turn it back on for you.
Gents,
It
this
keeps
is not going well.
going back on.
I'm boring
What's
you.
going on?
Your food is ready. I'm out of here. Goodbye.
It won't go off. Oh my God, I'm going to have to stop
wouldn't
breathing
get this
heavy. I'm going to have tapping, Ben. Oh my
I wouldn't
days.
get this from
Go on.
AI. How very dare you?
Yeah, no, and if it was an AI podcast, it'd all be perfect. It'd all be slick. There'd be none of these
We'd be doing
stupid.
our deep dive. We'd be
But what I was basically saying is, I heard Elon saying recently about no point doing a medical degree because the Optimus robots and whatnot will be more secure. Why would you do that? They're more likely to be more safe to be able to perform these surgeries in your home safely. Blah blah blah. Now, obviously, he's selling a commercial product, and I'm not suggesting there is definitely a bias and a reason why he's saying it that way. But my daughter wants to be a doctor.
Hmm.
And I think to myself, okay, well, what's right now? Is it worthwhile doing? Well, what people can't see is that there is a long game here, and there's also a short game. And there's a short game if AI develops into AGI or ASI quickly, or whether it doesn't. There's a long game to think about whether Agentic becomes normalized or it doesn't. And I'll mention Agentic in a minute. But the thing is the pace that we've seen since November 2022 when AI was invented. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But when it came out, the fact that what we've just seen with ChatGPT 5 and Opus 4.6 and Claude, like they are streets ahead of anything we've ever seen before in terms of the agentic world, which I want to ask you about in a moment. And that is shifted, like not just education, that's shifting every industry. So I'm saying to my once in a day, you would say, what does the world need? Where are the job opportunities? Where how do you get to the qualifications to get to that? Now I'm saying, what are the dispositions that you develop in that can mean that whether you're a medical practitioner, whether you become I don't know, like influencer, like what's going to exist? What's still going to exist? And so yeah, it's a tough one. But on that agentic thing, I just want to ask you this before we go any further. Agentic AI is obviously a buzz phrase, but from an education perspective, what do you think might be on the horizon in the short to medium term future from an agentic perspective?
I'm doing a lot of kind of work on this in terms of what would it look like in the classroom? What would it look like for education? What would it look like for teachers? And I've kind of spent most of my time thinking about the difference between efficacy and efficiency. If we could take away, we talked about earlier on, taking away the admin and the distraction factors of education for teachers to really focus on what they're good at and what's important, assuming that that is still needed and wanted, because that's another unspoken assumption here. The agentic nature of being able to go and do deep research and dictating, sitting in the car and talking to your phone and having it do all the lesson plans and doing all your emails and ping, 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 and then, taking actions for you. I think there's something really attractive about that for teachers. Teachers don't want cognitive offloading. They just want offloading. And I think that's really important, that we should be using agentic AI for that. But to come back to your earlier point, if all of those tasks can be done for us, right? And if I'm advising my 11-year-old, and I used to always tell her, go into STEM, we need more STEM, and I'm not saying that anymore because I don't see necessarily what science is going to do with agentic AI, what will be taken away in terms of research and development. I'm not sure what the role of engineers will be over time. I'm not sure that the inherent, like medicine and law and all of these things that were traditionally very desirable knowledge economy, status driving jobs, it's forcing everybody to rethink those things. And I think within education, there is the meta kind of impact of agentic, of what it could mean for the teaching role. And then there's the much more important, what it means for kids and their development. It's too soon to tell. But I think the one thing that I can tell, the more and more I think about it, is if actions can be taken by AI, if all of the agents can do orchestration and be your 1950s housewife or your robot butler or whatever it is your kind of your desirable analogy here, then I think what is remaining for humans and for education is the ability to build worlds, the ability to be creative and unlikely and unpredictable and maybe eccentric and weird and funny, and all of those things are really valuable. So now I'm starting to think maybe I should be pushing her into the creative arts or the liberal arts where there were traditionally no jobs. But now, because of world models, if she was a niche expert on second century Japan, then maybe that's going to be really valuable. Maybe the idea that if you can create something out of nothing, if you've ever watched AI and AI tried to start a conversation, have you seen that viral clip? It's hilarious. Love it. It just says everything you need to know about AI, where it is right now and where the agents will be. That constant managing of like an Asian swarm. It'll be like managing a classroom. It'll be like thinking, all of the tools that we have as teachers, it'll be exactly that. I think so. Educators will be well placed for agentic AI. It's whether they'll have enough time to upskill, technologically speaking. Like, who has time to sit down and really understand multibook on a weekend? Or, think about what Claudebot is doing, or how we're going to get co-work into our schools. It's too fast for that for education at the moment. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we can bypass some of that. But agentic AI and what it means for education, I could go another hour on that, guys. But I think that is important for us to have an eye on the future. But it is essentially, if you think about it in terms of middle management or classroom management, that's what managing all these agents will be. Knowing their quirks, their idiosyncrasies, their particular talents, how to connect them, how to get group work working effectively. Like, we have been doing that forever as teachers. So why wouldn't we be the best orchestrators of agentic AI?
Well, I have led a variety of different people, from learners to adults, and techies to educators and so on. And what's really interesting is sometimes it's easier to lead, and might be easier to lead AI than some of those people. And ultimately, some of those people are very similar to ultimately being directive to those. Some of those people don't want autonomy. So it's really interesting. Leadership will be, I think, continuation, but it depends on the level and all those kind of things. We always finish the podcast with quickfire questions. If you are an avid listener, as you pretend to be, let's put it to the test. I'll start, Ben will come in, and then I'll finish. So, first one, quickfire. If schools were judged like restaurants by how much customers actually enjoy the experience, what would change overnight?
Are you still reading them? You look like you were reading them
Yeah.
there. Do you not know them off by heart?
Always.
I know them
No.
off by heart.
I don't even know my
Okay.
own name, so that's always a challenge. So,
Well, I'm failing already. Alex is faster than me. So I would say the one thing they say about cooks is that they are people who will use more butter and salt than you would ever dare. So I think if I take your analogy, what we need to do if we took our cue from restaurants is if we have to put more love and wisdom in, love being the butter, I guess, and salt being the wisdom. But ultimately we need to pour more of ourselves into education. And I think that if restaurants and schools were the same, that is what you could take. You could taste the difference.
Taste the difference. Somebody's got a slogan there already, haven't they? What's the most dangerous myth that educators tell themselves to avoid real change?
We've tried this before and didn't work. That's the other half. We tried this before and it didn't work. It's back to that institutional antibodies issue. There are still a vast world of possibilities out there. And saying we've tried it before, or we've seen this before, or this is more of the same, that is the biggest, most dangerous myth. I've seen it in every school. I've seen it in every staff room I've been in. That eye-rolling moment. And I've been that person at the back of the room. The older you get, the more you cross your arms and occasionally want to say we have tried this before, because we have. But there's always newness. There's always novelty out there. And to your earlier point, we still have to stay in the arena. We still have to keep challenging ideas and coming up with new possibilities and permutations and combinations and all of those things, because it's important and it's worth it.
mix this last one up. If a 5-year-old, because mine did the other day, asked you why you have to go to school, what would you actually say?
It's usually a 10-year-old, isn't it? But I would say for mine, and I do, it's because I love you and I want the best for you. And I think a few of your guests have said versions of that. Like, this is the best of all the possible worlds right now. Like democracy, it's the best of all the possible options, or the least bad option, I guess, if we're keeping your book in mind. But for me, there's nowhere that we can socially construct learning better than in a classroom. That's why we raced back to the classroom together and taught with masks on, even though teaching with masks was horrific. We wanted to be together to learn that badly. That's why I want her in the classroom. I want her to be experiencing that socially constructed learning, that moment around an object of shared fascination that you don't get alone, that you don't get without schools.
Love it. And it's been a great conversation. I think there's loads that we could have delved into. We haven't talked lots about Eblana, but we'll put links in the show notes to what you're doing in terms of the frameworks, how you use practical advice for teachers and certifications you're doing, and how people can get involved with that. Obviously, you've got a book coming out soon as well. When's that due out, Rita? Do we know yet?
In 8 weeks, I believe. And
8 weeks.
I'll do a quick plug for a free course, because it's always good to have something free. We have a course on sustainable AI, so dealing with the power and consumption of electricity. So if I'll send you the link for that, teachers are teachers forever. So we're desperate to give things away for free. So please do come and join us on that course. It's really worth having some tools, some framework, and some language to be able to use in schools around the power sustainability concerns and how we can mitigate them.
Amazing. So we'll link to that. We'll link to some of the other resources, and I'm sure that we'll be in touch soon. Maybe at some point we'll have an Edufuturist Wolfpack community out in Dublin. If not, we'll just come to Dublin and drink some Guinness. Anyway. It's been wonderful having you on the podcast. Thanks so much for for joining us and for your wisdom in that. Keep doing what you're doing, and we're looking forward to where this might go next. Thanks, Rita, and
Thanks,
thanks
guys.
everybody for joining us for another episode of the Edufuturists podcast.
Thank you.
Shaping the next generation. Dancing to the rhythm, catching every beat. Together we embrace the futures at our feet. The futures